even I couldn't have possibly predicted that Elden Ring, Shadow of the Erdtree, could have flopped as badly as it did. People are doing damage control right now. They're doing the typical from slop thing where they're trying to say that like, well, actually, people just got filtered by the difficulty. Never mind, this is a DLC campaign that comes that requires specific things to be done in the base game to get through, right? Never mind that people know how to play the game, that it's been out forever, that it's old as dirt, that this is supposed to be the biggest DLC campaign of the year. People were calling this game of the year worthy, right? Ever since this thing was announced. Like, I remember when people were trying to tell you that Shadows of the Erdtree would outsell Tears of the Kingdom, right, in 2023, and that would win Game of the Year over Baldur's Gate 3. Like, it was, like, some of the most insane, elaborate cope I've ever seen in my life. Like, it was absurd how hardcore fanboys were in pretending that this game was going to be an industry-defining masterpiece. And now that the game is out, now that it's been forgotten, now that it's like not taking off, now that it's not becoming popular, now that it has mixed reviews on Steam, it couldn't be more clear that not only was I right about the DLC, about how it wasn't going to save the game, how it wasn't going to lead to like some new resurgence of popularity, how it was going to like just kind of flounder. Players would like blast through it in a weekend and then just kind of forget about it. It would not like. Not only was I right, I was more right than anyone possibly could have predicted because this game is I think people are really underestimating just how poorly received this game actually is, right? Right now people are like doing damage control for it and like bending over backwards to justify like everything they've done here with like the rehashed content and the reused move sets and just again some of the plot elements, right? But I do think it's safe to say that like now that we have all of our questions answered, now that we've gotten the DLC, now that we have gotten all the content in Elden Ring, yeah, it's safe to say that Elden Ring did not match up to 2017's Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, let alone the sequels, right? Elden Ring was a complete failure in spite of all the shilling campaigns, in spite of the YouTubers, in spite of game journals, Elden Ring was a failure. And this really needs to be established going forward as to just what happened here, right? This was a game that was propped up artificially by a corrupt game journals trying to sell you on the idea that PlayStation and Xbox have games that like Nintendo Switch does not have, right? They were trying to convince you that like FromSlop is some like top tier game developer when in reality they aren't anything noteworthy in any way, shape, or form, right? Like they were trying to tell you that like, oh, Elden Ring was Game of the Year 2022, Armored Core 6 was Game of the Year 2023, and Shadows of the Erdtree would be Game of the Year 2024. It was insane, right? It was completely out of touch with reality. Let's just ignore all the better developers out there. Let's just ignore all the better games on Nintendo platforms. Let's just ignore the fact that Elden Ring specifically ignored the Nintendo Switch, right? They did not release on Nintendo Switch because they knew, right, that if you players were able to compare Elden Ring and Zelda side by side, it would be exceedingly obvious that Elden Ring is inferior to Zelda in every way, shape, and form. Like just like The Witcher and Dragon Age before it, these games, uh, the illusion that these games are better than Zelda is nothing more than like a smokescreen cast by game journals. Like, oh, look at the mature storylines. Oh, look at the dark visuals. Oh, they're so much cooler than Zelda. But in reality, they're just nothing special. Um, so what can we learn from this when it comes to Shadows of the Year Tree? Like, what can we take away from this? Like, first of all, we really need to establish like the pattern whenever like someone starts like talking about how a Souls game is disappointing, right? You know, because this happened with Sekiro, this happened with Dark Souls 2, this happened with like the more poorly received From Slap games in recent years. Is that every single time the audience accuses you of not being good at the game. This happens to me whenever I bring up how Dark Souls is casual. Is that like, oh man, you just got filtered by it? No, I've beaten Dark Souls, right? I just don't like the game. Is the is the real issue here, right? Being able to beat it has nothing to do with people not liking games, okay? Like Dark Souls, From Slop games at their core are not very fun. They're not very memorable. They're not very engaging. They don't have a lot going for them, right? They don't have good combat. They don't have good gameplay. They don't have any. There's no reason to play them, really. People only play From Slop games in order to feel a sense of being, in order to like feel like they're in on gamer culture, right? It's a status symbol. That's all it is. That's all it ever was. Like Dark Souls is the game you want to get through in order to pretend as if you're better than other gamers, right? Like that's all this amounts to, right? You can see this on social media right now. Nobody's talking about the DLC or like, what you do in it or the plot elements. No, they're trying to pretend that the people who don't like the DLC, right? People like me, people who don't like From Slap in general, are just casuals who just will never be able to have the skill set to like hold the block button and just slowly walk forward, occasionally like swiping your weapon at whatever gets in your way. Like again, like Dark Souls is not hard, Elden Ring is not difficult, right? Like being KO'd in one hit isn't like some radical like innovative game design decision, right? The game is clunky, it's slow, it's unintuitive. Like again, Elden Ring is nothing special, right? In a lot of ways, I do think that's the major takeaway with the DLC is that like the base game wasn't good either, right? Like that's the major thing I want people to know when like they start like realizing like, wow, this DLC is really short. It's really boring. It really doesn't have a lot going for it. The base game was the same way, right? It was it was something that was hyped up in order to basically because gamers on other platforms don't have alternative platforms, don't have anything worth talking about or playing, right? Whereas Nintendo fans were getting things like Pokemon Legends Arceus and Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, ARMS, Splatoon 3, right? We get like bangers every month, it feels like, right? Meanwhile, like FromSlot fans are like starving, just starving for content. They get excited over everything. Like, oh, is that a Berserk reference? Like, oh man, it looks like we're going to do the Eclipse. Oh man, that was so hardcore. They do this thing every single time where they just act as if they're some enlightened individuals that really understand video games. And the bitter reality, the grim reality, is that they they don't know anything at all, right? They don't have any skill sets outside of like the stereotypical from slot formula, right? They don't appreciate other games. They don't appreciate more difficult games, right? It really does feel as if like Dark Souls fans are like genuinely believe that like from slot titles are like the most difficult titles out there. But you just know that if these guys ever played something like Gradius 3, they would get wrecked, right? If they ever tried playing the Wonderful 101, like they would never be able to wrap their minds around like actually good innovative combat. If they ever played God Hand, like it's just I don't even know what would happen, right? Like to me, it couldn't be more apparent that the from slot formula is on the way out, right? Like, I don't even know why they bother releasing DLC, because to me, it just seems like they wasted a ton of time and resources on this. Like, I'm seeing people like speculate that the reason the DLC is so terrible is because FromSlot wasted all their time and resources developing Armored Core 6. And of course, like Armored Core 6 was a flop. It did not reach the numbers Elden Ring did. Like, where is FromSlop going to go from here? Like, they can't just bring Tenshu back. Sekiro was never popular, right? Dark Souls can't just keep milking Dark Souls forever, right? Like FromSlop does not have the technical ability or the talent to innovate, to make new IPs, to make new franchises. It's just going to be the same thing over and over and over again. And I think the DLC is a very good example of just what exactly is wrong with FromSlop.